Hi, I'm Thaddaus Dawson, and welcome to another exciting episode of 10,000 Minority Appraisers podcast. Today, I say this every week that I'm excited, but I am always excited that people take the time out to spend time with us on our podcast. And our whole goal and mission here is to close the wealth gap through accurate valuations. And today we have none other than our normal reoccurring speaker, William Michael Cunningham, renowned economist. And our special guest today is Mr. Kimble, Esquire, extraordinaire. He's got so many different titles, and I know he's got physic, and he does a lot of lobbying on the Hill. He does a lot of work with SCLC. I'm going to let him tell you all the wonderful things that he does. He and I have been working together probably about 14 or 15 years now. And we started off working on appraisal issues and valuation issues way back then with representation. I believe it was with the black bankers or the urban bankers. And then we met at a conference here in Atlanta. I know he's a mixed martial arts specialist. I don't know where he is with his, I don't know exactly what it is he practices. I'll let him tell you. But without further ado, I'm going to let Kevin jump in there. And the gist of what this podcast is all about is public policy and the impact and how we need to advocate and be proactive in the space. We are always playing defense, and we are heavily impacted by policies, and they slowly sneak up on us. And Bill will be able to speak to the economic impact of the policies. So without further ado, I'm going to let Kevin jump in there.
Thanks, Dad, and good to see you again, Bill. It's always good to be on a panel with Bill Cunningham, as I know it's going to be rock roaring. So I'm Kevin Kimble, the president and founder of a group called Financial Services Innovation Coalition. We're a think tank here in D.C., but as Thaddaus mentioned, I also represent the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in D.C. as their D.C. bureau chief. And I do some work. I run another think tank for them called the Southern Christian Leadership Global Policy Initiative. My expertise is in policy and advocacy. I'm no longer a registered lobbyist, but I do spend time on Capitol Hill working with members of Congress and around the country working with state legislators. Our goal in life is to get people like Thaddaus and Bill engaged in advocacy to defend or assist African American business leaders and others in accessing the power that the government has. One of the big misconceptions in the country, especially among African Americans, is that people make it on their own, that they don't need the government, that they've been told, they've heard this on TV, they don't need the government. But the truth of the matter is, you will not find one billionaire in America or in the world in general that's not benefiting from government resources, right? Everybody from Elon Musk to Jeff Bezos, they all have government contracts. So the idea that African Americans will be left out of the government spending and have a chance to be successful is erroneous. If you're not in government, there's a reason why the lobbying business is a multi-billion-dollar business, because every business knows the government's where all the money is.
And so Kevin, you're saying that they didn't just pick themselves up by their bootstraps?
Well, they did, but the government gave them the boost and the bootstrap. So yeah. but they did not. Even if you go back to the railroad industry, I mean, the robber barons, all those guys. The Stanford, the guy who created Stanford University, was governor of California. He got his money from the government, made him a big loan to build railroads. Then he destroyed all the documents, so he never had to pay the loan back. Right? I mean, so the idea that there's all these self-made people is just not true, but that mentality allows Black business people to ignore government. Right? So while they're at the golf course trying to generate contracts from people, the people they're talking to are sending their lobbyists to DC to get the contracts, right? And we've been on a mission the last 3 or 4 years, of intense mission, to talk about the disparity in government contracting. Because if you go through it, New Jersey, where we've got a study in New Jersey, a study out of Minnesota, but I'm going to focus on New Jersey. New Jersey disparity study shows that African American contractors make up 11% of the contracting population, but they get 0.17% of the contracts. So not 1% of the contracts, not 1/10 of a percent of the contract, but 0.17% of the contracts. That is $1.70 for every $1,000 of contracting money. Right? So that is, there's no way black people will ever have wealth if you're getting that little bit of the major source of revenue. I mean, we're talking about billions of dollars being spent, and African Americans are lucky to get, you know, a couple $1 million out of that. So that's just not
So
sustainable.
that was with DEI.
That's
What does that
what,
look like? That was with DEI and affirmative action. So
yeah,
what exactly does that look like without DEI and affirmative action and
we're about
Project
to find out.
2025?
We're about to find out how close to zero you can get without being zero. No, it is one of our, it's one of the most frustrating things dealing with everyone's. People complain about D, like white people complain about DNI. We're like, well, what are they complaining? We're not getting. They don't want us to have 1.17% is too much, obviously. But then African American, you hear African Americans say, well, we don't need the government. I mean, it's just it's idiotic. I mean, there is no one who gets rich without the help of the government. And so, um,
Keeping to black people's defense, I believe we suffer from post-traumatic slavery syndrome.
I don't disagree with that, but that can't be the. If that's the case, we have to break out of that, or else we'll never succeed, right? I mean, there's at some point we have to try to make some ground forward, and there are people who are doing relatively well. I'm not saying they're doing well, but there are some African Americans who are in business, who have companies, whatever, who should spend some of their resources in this space. So, you go to Capitol Hill. I mean, remember, these members of Congress and state legislators and mayors, they work for us, right? These jobs don't exist for their benefit. They exist for them. They exist for our benefit. They're supposed to be our representatives in the government, and we are not requiring that they do enough to help us.
So basically, you're saying we just give our votes away without any return.
Without any return, and again, I don't blame the members of Congress. If no one, you have a busy job. The people, like, I remember during COVID, I had friends on the Hill during COVID. It wasn't 3 days into the shutdown that the airline industry was calling Congress people for money. I mean, hadn't been 3 days. They were sending letters to Congress asking for money. By the time African Americans started talking about, like, the program with the SBA and all that, that funding program, it was over. I mean, in fact, I think you signed, and Bill, you both signed letters that we sent to the president saying that letting the SBA be the head of the decision makers on giving that money out, COVID money out, was bad for black people, because the SBA is like the second most racist institution in the government, only second to ag, right? And so the idea that blacks end up getting less than 1% of that SBA money was always a foregone conclusion, because African Americans did not spend any time advocating for the policy, which is what I've been complaining about. That the rule got written, then people started complaining after when it wasn't successful, instead of being at the forefront of it.
So that tends to happen in all of the spaces, Kevin. We've been doing quite a bit of work with the USDA, and they just recently had a $2.2 billion one-time payment for the farmers who had been discriminated against. And it just appears as though our discrimination or our lack of wealth is distinctive and deliberate from everybody else's, but everybody gets lumped into the minority space, and we
Yeah.
still end up at the bottom of the bottom, even when there is a carve out. And once you do get a carve out, there is a very short window before there is exhaustion,
Yep.
which we are experiencing and seeing now. That
Yeah.
we're what, 4 years after George Floyd, 5 years, and
Yeah.
everything is sort of hit the fan, and
Yep.
yet still we have not closed the wealth gap. It's actually growing, and at the rate it's going, black folks won't own anything in the next 70 years
Mhm.
without some sort of turnaround. Now, Bill, I might be speaking out of school. That's your lane with the economics and the policy. But from where I sit, and the numbers are declining, and you said the SBA was the second most racist organization in the government, next to the USDA. Where do you see the opportunity at for Black people to again participate and not even participate, survive? It's like we're constantly under duress. So it's like you don't really get a chance to plan or build wealth because you are in a constant state of survival.
I
Yeah,
think
well,
you.
firstly, Stephen was the one who said that the SBA was the second most racist organization. I just didn't say it. It's not that I don't think that. I just didn't say it, So, but in case they start to come after people, I want them to come after Kevin, not me. But they do have. Um, I was. I spoke at the Texas Black Chamber Economic Conference in August, I think it was, and there were two African American people there who were lawyers from SBA who would confirm what Keevans thought of. They came up to me and they said, hey, listen, this SBA is terrible, especially when it comes to actually getting money to African Americans. So, yes, in terms of where the opportunities are, an interesting question, especially now because we know that we're going to face some difficulties with this new administration, with the House, the Senate, and the White House being controlled by a party which has to be considered hostile to Black interests. From Ronald Reagan selling crack in Black communities to, all the way up to Donald J. Trump causing a 41% decline in African American businesses, there can be no doubt that of the two political parties, the Republicans are the worst, the absolute worst for Black economic interests. That's just clear from the numbers. So, in terms of where the opportunities are, it's my contention that the opportunities are within our community. Let's throw up that slide that there you go. Wealth in the Black community. So it's always been my contention that in this society, wealth maximization is the wrong goal. Life maximization is the right goal. Why? Because a focus on material items and material welfare will never work in a society that does everything it can to deny material comfort to Black people specifically, as a way to maximize white wealth. So my contention is the solution is to realize that basically all of the theories, the political and social theories, equate wealth with life. And that's an okay assumption to make in a capitalistic society where you definitely need money in order to purchase the items that are related to extending your life or even to having a life. Food, medical care, police protection, housing, all of those things in this society focus on wealth as being the way to achieve or to accumulate those goals. But again, it's the wrong focus, and it's not so much that it's you shouldn't be aware of it. It's just that we've gone overboard in focusing on money and on celebrity and on all of the things that don't really matter. Black people are experts at survival and life maximization in a continuously hostile environment. That is what we probably need to be focused on, not so much just the material side of things. And again, we know that over the course of the last 20, 30, 40 years, we've had a culture which is forced onto Black people this relentless focus on materialism, me, mine, and that basically, by the way, that comes out of the Department of Economics at the University of Chicago. This free market theory that came to dominate economics and, by extension, public policy is where we went wrong, and that's it. Just the facts. Those are just, if you just look at how bad things are, both from the standpoint of affordability. I thought a market-based focus was supposed to make things more affordable. That's just, it's a silly assumption to make. It was never, a market-based focus was never going to make things more affordable. It was always going to make things less affordable by increasing the prices of goods and services, in some cases dramatically, as we've seen over the course of the past 40 years. So we need to refocus and take a step back in terms of materialistic focus, just focusing solely on money. We also have to focus on value of life, quality of life, fairness, justice, equity, all of the things that we've been focused on over the course of certainly the past 4 years. This past administration was expert at starting to make that shift, starting to refocus people on what's meaningful. But again, we know that there were a lot of barriers placed in the way of completing that refocusing. I don't know if that's helped. Does that help answer your question?
It does a little bit, and it kind of plays into the difference. Well, you said what's important. So I just finished writing this land valuation course for heirs property training, and basically talked about highest and best use. And one of the highest and best uses, or part of the disconnect, is European versus African and native culture. And when it first came, the Indians believe that you cannot own the land. So
That's right.
right off the bat, that gets back to what you talked about is versus wealth versus quality of life. They believe that the land was for everybody. And so there's four basic tests in highest and best use. However, there's been a fifth test that has been added in federal and Indian land transactions, which is a spiritual component. So there is definitely a spiritual component that goes above and beyond, that is not quantified through a dollar amount based on what you said. And so I think that's something that really has to be looked at. And there's also a spiritual component when it comes to heirs property. So we've been doing quite a bit of work in the heirs property sector. And because of the level of mistrust in government, most black folks, over 60%, don't have a will or an estate. So there's a large concentration of heirs property, which we tend to lose for pennies on the dollar, probably somewhere around $100 billion a year in heirs property. So all of those things play into that. And that also plays back into some of my questions for you, Kevin, is how do we combat this through policy? How do we make these changes? Right now, the ASC is looking for responses. ASC is the appraisal subcommittee that are due in February, and we will be writing in order to update. What they're doing is updating their policies as far as licensing and administering through the states. So I believe that first and foremost, the appraisal model is broken. If you want to cure or solve appraisal bias, I really believe it's going to be up to the federal government, because they were very instrumental in creating the system that exists now, and it's going to take the federal government to solve it. And each individual state having an individual licensing requirement is never going to happen. And the states have everybody belongs to Arrow, and so the whole appraisal industry has been hijacked by the appraisal pimps and the appraisal management companies. And so they are able to just run amok through the states. And the states have allowed USPAP to be weaponized, and they use it as an excuse as opposed to a guideline to be able to correct it. Now, there is a tool that is now available that I believe goes a long way to mitigating appraisal bias, and that is the reconsideration of value that was initiated, and we were probably one of the early users or advocates of the reconsideration of value because of the work that I've done with the VA and with the National Community Reinvestment Coalition. So on the short term, I think that is going to be a way to actually solve the appraisal gap by being fair to everybody. Uh, it allows the people who feel like they've been undervalued the opportunity to express themselves, but then it also allows the appraisers the opportunity to explain their work without jumping directly to appraisal bias. Because
Well,
the big
couple of things. Couple of things. Number one, saying that we should not focus solely on material items doesn't mean that we should not focus somewhat on material things. And reconsideration of value is a good policy to implement that would correctly structure your focus on value. Where should your focus be on materialistic and value items? Reconsideration of value is a good, and you might, by the way, you might take a second and explain that. But let me also say that in terms of policy, remember what we had suggested back in before the 2008 financial crisis was that in cases where there was mortgage loan fraud, that the fraudulent mortgages should have been extinguished and new non-predatory mortgages should have been created and placed on properties. So there are policy suggestions like that that would completely solve some of these issues. We know that they're not utilized because the financial institution regulatory structure has been captured, which means that it works on behalf of the large financial institutions as opposed to working on behalf of the public. So the first thing, so refocusing your, restructuring your priorities to make sure that the spiritual, as you mentioned, moves higher in the consideration stack, advocating for policies that directly solve whatever issue you're talking about. Reconsideration of value in cases where there's fraud and discrimination. What you should do is extinguish the discriminatory mortgages and financial instruments and write new non-discriminatory, non-predatory types of investment vehicles or mortgages. And then number three, simply having this knowledge and simply having this discussion is something that I think is important.
well, I think the predatory loans have been pretty much extinguished to a certain extent, but now they're about to open up Pandora's box all over again with the FHFA's recent appraisal waiver. Now, with the appraisal waiver,
No, the predatory loans were not extinguished in a way that benefited the public. They were extinguished in a way that benefited large financial institutions and the people that caused the problem. So
oh yeah,
that's the other issue is to make sure that we understand that and use it as a guide for future policies that you're advocating for. And again,
So
I
here,
think
well,
you're
both you guys,
exactly right.
you guys. So this is you guys are having the exact conversation that you should have, right? From a physics standpoint, advocacy is about everything you just talked about requires government advocacy. So both of y'all should be on the Hill lobby, right? I mean that we could talk to each other and that's great, but what doesn't happen is this conversation doesn't get had where it needs to be had. Like I mean, the one thing I don't want to, the one thing I don't disagree with necessarily Bill's idea that money can be a problem, especially when you can't get that much of it. But that's the game that's being played. So we have to play the game that's being played, or else we're quitting. I mean, there's no way for us to if one side, you talk about kickboxing, right? And so if one person is playing by rules where he can kick you in the head, but the other one's playing by rules where he can only kick you in the body, the guy who can kick you in the head and the body is always going to win. So we have to have an idea that we have to fight for everything. We don't have a choice to not worry about greed, right? We have to have that part of the fight, or else we're we're seeding, like in cannabis. For a whole bunch of years, we talked to African American members about making sure there was equity in the cannabis space once it became legal. Well, a lot of people didn't want to touch it, So now there are very few African Americans in the cannabis business, right? And all of those, so you have to fight everywhere. You just can't. There's no place you can afford not to fight. So this conversation we had here, all y'all should be on Capitol Hill asking for that, right? I mean, whenever I go to the Hill, I don't see y'all up here. I've taken Bill the Hill once. I've taken Thaddaus the Hill once, but that's every week. You should be up there asking for that. I mean, that is what this whole conversation is about.
How do we get people to know how important it is to show up, to check in with their congressman? It's a lot, and I mean,
Very
Bill is
easy
in.
to be done.
It's just it's kind of overwhelming, and then the people who we trust really can't be trusted. So again, who is really fighting for us on our behalf? And like I was just saying, the FHFA implementing appraisal waivers up to 97%, that can only come back bad. And I believe it's just the first
Did
step
they do a
because
rulemaking? Did they do a rulemaking on that? Did they do a rulemaking?
yeah, they just
Did you
did
write?
it.
Did you write a comment letter on the rulemaking?
I haven't written a comment, but now a lot of the other agencies are writing comments. We are in the process of writing a response to it. But my point here is
Wait, no, before you,
it
but
just
I want to keep the point right. This is where because everyone shirks this responsibility. You guys are experts. You know this is happening, right? You have to engage. So you should. Who's your congresswoman, Nikema Williams? You should be in her office right now with a letter. Say, hey, you need to call these guys on the carpet and have them do something. They depend on you as an expert to do this. I mean, and without your expertise, this does not happen. I mean, that's just, and it's not fair that you have to spend all your time doing all this stuff. But if we're going to make a difference in this space, you're like the guy who has to lead that.
damn, Kevin, that's a lot of responsibility, and I got enough right now. So that's just
But you're the only one. Who else knows? I mean, I'm pretty well versed in a lot of stuff. I didn't even know about this FHA thing until you just mentioned it, right? So if that's the case, if you don't do it, who's going to do it?
Oh, there's some other appraisal organizations now.
Now you're shirking
Now writing.
responsibility to them.
No, I'm not shirking.
No,
I'm in there. But the other thing that I wanted to make a point of, where back to the predatory lending, I think the predatory lending becomes because of those secondary mortgage market instruments. They needed some place for that money to be able to go. I think this waiver creates the second opportunity for predatory lending without appraisals and appraisal waivers. And with that being said, again, that those loans violate and to Phil Crawford's bit, he calls it data cancer. So those sales then go in and infect the neighborhood. He talked about this is Phil Crawford is voice of the appraiser. He does a podcast for the last 10 years in Cincinnati. Awesome dude. And what he talks about is that data cancer. Now you've got that high sale because there was no appraisal done. Now you've reestablished the market and can use that as a comparable sale. But is it truly a comparable sale? So
no, it's the same thing we saw with predatory lending, where those predatory loans, remember, infected the loan pools and made the objective value of those investment instruments subject. People just didn't know they weren't worth what the big banks were saying they were worth. They were worth far less. But the big banks got paid. Same thing here. The other thing I'll say, and the solution, by the way, is the same. The solution is to extinguish the predatory or the inaccurate mortgages or loans based on those properties, write new, more accurate loans. But the key, again, is that extinguishment. Legally, the state of Minnesota actually did that in cases of predatory lending. They actually went in and they said, according to state law, because that mortgage loan is based on faulty information, we, the state of Minnesota, are extinguishing it. We are saying that that loan is no longer value. And who took the hit? The financial institution took the hit. The bank or the mortgage company took the hit. That's why, and we had suggested back in 2006, 2007 that this policy be implemented nationwide. Of course, we had no chance at all of having that happen because of the impact on the financial institutions, which, remember, had captured the regulatory structure. So they made sure that that was not going anywhere. Now, in your case, that brings me to another solution. As you mentioned, there have been a number of cases with heirs property, where heirs property has been fraudulently conveyed or not, the full value hasn't been realized. Same solution. When you have those types of situations, you should come in and reverse that transaction. Basically, that's an illegal transaction. It's fraudulent. I could never get away with as a black man, with the fraudulent transaction. Let's say I want to sell my car and I said it was worth $100,000, but it was only worth $10,000. You better believe that if somebody bought it for that 100K figure and they figured out what the true value is, they would reverse that transaction and come after me to get that $90,000 differential. No question about it.
But it
You
varies
should
from
do the
state
same
to
thing.
state what the rules are. And once you get a fractional interest, now you can force the sale. So now you're buying stuff from pennies on the dollar, and it just gets back down to communication and awareness. But to Kevin's point, the advocacy part is huge. But to go even further, once you have infected the sales with the data cancer, now you have established a new base that is even higher. And what that then does is now you're raising property taxes based on that new number.
That's
You're
right.
raising
That's right.
insurance costs based on that new number. But just like any cancer, it'll start to metastasize and spread. And there's not a whole lot of recourse. And what happens is when it shows up, when the people go back to refinance and then tap into their equity in the next couple of years, and you realize that, wow, now you're getting an appraisal versus when you took the appraisal waiver, you didn't get the appraisal. So now that data cancer has now spread and infected that market. And when you get an appraiser out there to actually look at it, now you've got a problem. So it's pay me now or pay me later. But under this new administration, their goal is, I believe, to build 4 million houses. And so
No, no, no,
where
no, no. That was the old administration. That
so
was
what's the
something that
goal for
Miss
the new
Harris
administration?
did. Well, the goal for the new administration is to make sure you don't have a house. Unless it's owned by a large financial institution or a large mutual
Hedge fund.
fund or
But
institutional
here,
investor.
let me say this to you guys, and this is very important because the conversation we're having here is really thought provoking and involved, right? But the people who are going to make a difference here, like members of Congress or regulators, when are you going to talk to them? Because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are going to vote on this if it comes to the floor, or the ones who could introduce it. So that's where, like, getting from this is the hard, and this is the hardest part, right? Getting from here to making it actionable. Bill, like, remember the time we went to the Hill and you went to see the member of Congress? I told you had to know what your ask was, and first thing they asked you what your ask was, right? It's one of those things
Yeah.
where we have to, yeah, and it doesn't matter. Like, there's no bad idea. Like, we're so absent from the policy conversation that I don't care if you were talking about sprinkling pixie dust on mortgages. At least that'd be something, right? I mean, we're having this conversation. They're making changes, and we're not engaged in trying to change that. And that is, again, I don't care if we're talking about dog food content, heirs property, real appraisal. It doesn't matter. I don't care what. We have to start asking people for stuff, or we're screwed. Or we're not
Where
going to.
do we start, Kevin? That's why we got you here.
Yeah.
Where do we start this
Kim, for
conversation?
you and Bill, what you and Bill both need to do is write what you just said up. Write this as a white paper. Right. This is a problem. Give me the problem. Then you need to
Kevin,
go.
why can't it be a black paper?
Okay, write me a black paper, and then with all the information on it, right? And with the solution, like whatever solution is, like we're gonna eliminate, appraisal free mortgages. What I don't care what it is, just come up with a solution and start talking. Bills and DC. Go see Mrs. Holmes Norton. You go see. You got 5 members of Congress and there's 2 senators. Go see them all, right? I mean, and take people with you. Take the other appraisals. I mean, you. That's how this starts. I mean, it's meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. Then go back and do those meetings all over again. I mean, you just gotta. It's a
Keevan, who
grinding
can
process.
afford to do that?
Rich people, which is why they get everything they want.
Yeah, Elon Musk certainly can afford to do it. I mean, and that's what I was going to say. Again, that was my correction on this lack of focus on materialistic items. A reduction of a focus on materialism will help to support efforts like the one that Kevin just suggested, because you're not so focused on money. You're not so focused. Now that is problematic long term because you got to eat, So how do you do that over the long term time period that an effort like this would take? I don't know. I mean, other than there've been some interesting developments using online tools to do some stuff, but even that doesn't substitute for actually going into the offices and pressing the flesh and showing up. So I hear you.
People are
It's
busy. People are busy. That you look at a congressional staffer's schedule. The staffer, they've got 30 meetings a week, 40 meetings a week. And
yeah,
you're trying to get them to do it without them. You're trying to get them to do your thing without a meeting. That's just not,
yeah,
just not realistic. And it's, and I don't agree this think disagree this hard. I mean, this is hard. That's why people work so hard to keep us out of this stuff, right? Because they want the. I mean, this is purposeful, making us fight for 0.17% of the contracts. Think about if African American contractors were getting 10% of the money, their due share. You know how much money that
yeah,
puts into the system? That then they could take
yeah.
2% and invest it in advocacy.
Wouldn't our due share be our percentage of the population, or 18%?
Yeah, well,
Well,
in New Jersey, well, I'm doing New Jersey, the number of contractors is 11% black contractors. So I'm just going by that
Okay.
number. But I mean, in theory, you're right. That would be the 18% be right. And here's the other thing that you don't realize: black contractors got in New Jersey 0.17%, Hispanics got 2.5%, and Asians got 3.5%. So they're like 200 times more um, paid. They're getting 200 times more money than we are.
But if you say minority now, we're up to 6%.
Yeah, we don't. That's what we don't. We no longer say minor. We separate that because that is not the. And if you
well,
include
and
white women, go ahead.
yeah, that's part of what we're going to have to do. Again, the party's over. All of this talk about how black people, Hispanic people, Asian people, Indian people, we're all in the same boat. No, we're not all in the same boat because we're still at the back of the boat, under the tarp in the back there, and the water's leaking. Water's coming into the boat. Our part of the boat is sinking. So we've got to recognize that and act on that, I think, pretty deliberately. And yeah, again, I don't mean that in a negative way or in a way to discriminate against other minority groups. It's simply the economic facts. The economic facts are every minority group that has come into this country in the modern age has done better than the native black people who've been here for 300, 400 years. And we need to ask the question, well, why is that? White people will tell you some, racist white people will tell you that black people are at fault for that. That is not the case. That is absolutely not the case. We need to stop buying into any fiction that suggests that black people are at fault for their current standing with respect to the economic standings in the U.S. That is absolutely not the case. So we
Yeah,
need to address
I'll,
that firstly.
I'll throw this tidbit. It's kind of funny. It's so bad that Steve Bannon was on some show where he was being interviewed, and he said, that we need to start saving spaces in community colleges for African Americans or Black people because like we make up less than 1% of Silicon Valley workers, whatever. So it's bad when Steve Bannon feels bad for us. That's how bad it is. Even Steve Bannon's like, these Black people getting a raw deal. Jesus Christ.
But I mean, there
Well,
is
there,
nobody coming to save us. So we have to each, I think we have to save ourselves collectively, but everybody has a space and a lane. Mine just happens to be appraising. And I try to stay in that and make my impact there. And that's where I can see the holes and I can see the gaps and I can see the impact and see the strategy. So for me, short term, the goal is to focus on reconsideration of value to level the playing field. But even with that new policy of reconsideration of value, they haven't really given any deliberate direction on how to do it. So it's like now you still got the same folks that are in charge of doing the appraisals, in charge of doing the reconsideration of value, not utilizing subject matter experts to do the reconsideration of value. And the biggest thing is being able to articulate the argument objectively. So if the aggrieved party doesn't have the ability to articulate the argument, it's still going to be dismissed. And I've been at a couple of these different panels where they have given the silliest advice on how to do a reconsideration of value. I was at a panel at the Appraisal Foundation, and this guy's talking about kitchen cabinets and picking comps. Well, again, you're using outdated, antiquated methodology to the population who can at least afford it and who needs the most protection. The
See, but that's
reconsideration of
so
value.
brilliant. So I'm gonna circle back there. Everything you just said was brilliant, right? But you've got to advocate that to people. Like you could get Congress to change that rule, the regulator to change the rules. Like if you think there's a standard they should be using, you should be advocating for that. Right? I mean, that's where the advocacy comes. If you think there's a way they're doing it wrong, then you need to bring that to people's attention and give them the right answer. I mean, you are a thought leader, right? I mean, you are, without hands down, one of the biggest thought leaders in the real estate appraisal space. So if you're not pushing the envelope, no one else is. So it's a lot of pressure on you, but with great power comes great responsibility.
I don't know if I got any power, Kevin. I'm just
Well, you got the power of
moving.
knowledge. I mean, you've just expressed in 30 minutes, how long we've been on the phone, 5, 6, maybe 7 really strong ideas. I mean, really, seriously, very strong ideas that people need to hear and need to act on. But that's going to require you to take it, to take it to them.
They don't want to hear from me, Kevin.
I think it doesn't matter what they want to hear. They work for us. I mean, that's the whole thing. The people in the government work for us, and so it's our responsibility to make sure that they do what we ask them to. I mean, they're not doing you a favor taking your meeting. They're your employee.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
not
it's
a
their job.
favor. It's not. They're not doing you a favor. Oh, I deign to give you a meeting. No, we deign to give them our vote. They don't exist without us, and we have to remind them of that.
But don't you usually have to have some sort of political contribution in order to get those
No.
meetings or some sort of PAC?
In theory, obviously everyone needs to raise money to run a campaign, right? So people who donate tend to get more access. But at the end of the day, all that money doesn't matter if you decided tomorrow, I don't know who your congressman is, but if you decided tomorrow that you were going to organize all your neighbors to vote against your member of Congress because they weren't taking your meetings and doing stuff for black people, they'd have to pay attention to you, right? I mean, you have the power because you are the ones that eventually has to vote for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And again, there are a lot of myths about this area. Number one, which Thaddaus has just, exposed one, that you have to pay to play. You don't have to pay to play. You probably should if you really want to be impactful, if you can, and if you want to be impactful quickly. See, it depends on your time frame as well. Yes, if I walk in with $1 million pack and support for a congressman or a senator, are they going to pay more attention to me than they will the person who does not walk in with that money? Yes. Yeah, just like you would. You'd pay more attention to somebody that comes up to you with a 20 in their hand than somebody who doesn't have any money. So, but that's number one. But that's one of the key myths. The other myth is, again, Democrats and Republicans are the same and I'm wasting my vote. None of this stuff works. No, it works. It works. And there are people, Elon Musk has shown us how well it works when you understand and when you have the money to be able to make it work on your behalf. But it also took time and effort for that guy. He had to go stand on a bunch of stages and make a bunch of statements. Well, what we've got is time. We have the ability to stand on stages. That's what we should be utilizing. And as I mentioned, two key myths: your efforts don't mean anything unless you have a lot of money. That's a myth. Democrats, Republicans, exactly the same. Nothing matters. That's another myth. That's another myth. So we need to. And third myth is free markets always work well and always come up with the optimal solution, and you should leave everything up to the free market. No, no. Markets need to be regulated and monitored and watched all of the time, because as we've seen, they will go off the rails and move society into suboptimal outcomes. Climate, race, women, wars. Those are all suboptimal. The negative aspects of those subjects, suboptimal. But there's a way to make it better. And Kevin, you know, has been doing this for a while, but he also points out one of the key tactics that we can use. You gotta write, you gotta show up, you gotta email. And the other thing is you gotta know who to talk to. That's the first thing, that you should do. Understand who your representatives are, what they do, and get their email addresses. Write them, call them. You may not think it does a lot, but over time,
Show up at the town hall meetings. Yeah. Show up at the town hall meetings. Bring 5 or 6 people with you when you show up. I mean, you got to use. I mean, if you don't have money, then advocacy. So advocacy is a function of strength, and strength's a function of numbers. Right? I mean, that's how you look at this thing. So the more you bring to the table, the better off you. I mean, you've got a huge network that is all over the country. You just aren't leveraging that. I mean, you could put 100 people on a signature to the White House or to the regulators, right? You could get a whole bunch of people to write op-eds about how bad their members of Congress are doing and destroying their values. I mean, you have that kind of power. You just have to utilize it.
All right, Kevin, we're going to have to re-strategize because I'm traveling, and so I'm going to need to figure out how to focus my energies and effort and all this power you seem to keep thinking that I got.
Yeah, well, people, what? If that woman, Marjorie Taylor Greene, can have power, you can have power.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, think about it. I mean, she's a gym owner. You're a freaking real estate expert, and she was a gym owner. And so you've abdicated your power to her for no apparent reason.
Don't underestimate your power and your influence in this day and age. I agree.
Well, thank you. Kevin, I was just thought you had one simple solution to give us so we could just go ahead and get this whole ball rolling and make all these policy changes.
Because Sprinkle, so go outside, stand on one foot, put 2 hands up in the air, count backwards from 1,000. That'll solve all the problems. We'll be done.
And when you say when the writing and the advocacy, is it more advantageous to lobby your congressmen, your senators, representatives?
Everybody, you need to. Everyone needs to hear this problem and the solution. Right? It's a groundswell. It's kind of like how conservatives convince women they shouldn't be feminists. I mean, they didn't start out with one; they just kept doing it and doing it and doing it. Next thing you know, 20-year-old women thought, "I'm not a feminist. That's offensive," and it was brilliant strategy. If you want to change the real estate appraisal business, right? You've just got to say, real estate appraisal business is costing us this much money over and over again, and this is how you solve it. And every time there's opportunity, you talk to somebody. You just got to stay after it. When eventually you'll find a member of Congress to introduce an amendment for you. Eventually,
we've been doing that, and I did learn because with you and invited me to the CBC and speaking on your panels, and then going to Tunica to the policy conference and going to all these other different places, the political aspect of it. But I have no political interest, but I'm finding that is another step that is going to be necessary in order to advance the programming to where I think it should be.
And once again,
hold on. Let me say the first thing the founding fathers did when they created the country was give people the power to petition their government. That was the first thing they put in the Constitution. right? So it is the most important thing is to be able to, in a democracy, to be able to advocate for the government. So that is, it is it's your right and it's your responsibility.
So you do have a political interest. And I get what you're saying in terms of trying to make sure that you're nonpartisan. You're nonpartisan, but that doesn't mean you're non-political. You definitely have a political interest on the side of fairness and justice and equity and democracy, democratic capitalism, working the way that it's supposed to. All of these suggestions, reconsideration of value, are all mechanisms that are designed to make democratic capitalism work better, work like it was supposed to. And if you don't advocate for it, it's not going to work that way. It's not going to work that way. It's not going to work better. It's not going to work better because the large financial institutions have captured the regulatory institutions that are supposed to look out for the public interest, and what you're left with are, you know, three broke Negroes, who are looking out for the public interest because nobody else is.
When you think about it, all in America, all of our institutions are adversarial, right? Our political system is adversarial, our legal system is adversarial, our business system is adversarial. I mean, it's all so. And for an adversarial system to work, you have to have two sides. You have to have people on both sides of the system for it to work. So you're the counterbalance to the people who want to abuse the appraisal system.
Yep.
But it doesn't matter who's in office when it comes to economic opportunities for Black people
Well,
in
it's
housing.
No, it matters. No,
it
it matters.
matters.
It
It matters,
matters.
but you have to advocate in either case. But it does. I mean, you get a little bit better again in Biden's time. Black government contracting went down. And still is on. We've been on a downward trajectory for a while. But again, that is more a function of us not advocating, the black chambers and those people not doing what they're supposed to do in this process. I mean, there is a lot. I mean, the government can only respond to criticisms and to issues. They don't drive processes. So that is, remember, when you see a bill on the floor, it didn't randomly come. Someone drove that process. Someone who wanted that solution drove it. It didn't drop out of the sky.
And that's another reason why the current environment or the upcoming environment is so damaging, going to be so damaging to Black interests. At least you had a chance of getting your voice heard under the prior administration, and a good chance. There was legitimate concern and consideration for Black economic interests under the prior Biden administration. There's no question about that. The problem that we have is that the damage has been so great and it's been going on for 400 years that making up that differential is so large that any movement looks like it's not enough, because it isn't enough. Where we should be is up here. Biden came in, we moved from here to here. Just that, that was about it. And even that disappeared.
Yeah, and also we're at the end of this 60-year period where the retrenchment has come in on affirmative action and our efforts. So you think about in the last 3 years, we've lost civil rights, voting rights, civil voting rights, and all these cases have come down from the courts on getting rid of affirmative action and DEI. So we're also at that tail. So that limited. Bill, when you were working on the government, didn't they get rid of the Minority Business Development Agency or something like that, or they took out the minority and the Minority Business Development Agency?
They were really concerned about it, and they were going to take out the minority part of the Minority Business Development Agency. They recrafted their logo so that it wouldn't be, potentially offensive to those who didn't agree with minority business folks. This in a time when we know where the Black wealth gap is, we know where the Black business gap is. As you said, 1% contracts in New Jersey going to Black-owned firms.
0.1%, not 1%.
Sorry, I'm 0.1%. So we know that any arguments against minority business and affirmative action are bad faith arguments. They are bad faith arguments from the standpoint of the current economic situation. So we got to start there. But they're also, we bear some responsibility for that. because we did not caucus against Mitch McConnell and against others who were controlling the appointment of judges and have been doing so for 30 years. So it's not something that you can step up to this year and say, "Oh, we're going to change." No, no, it's a long game, and
Yeah,
this
I'm gonna
has
give you
been
another
part of
example.
the issue.
I said this both. I think I said this to both of y'all. Last summer, Harvard University did a report saying that black, though that white, that the black workers have ascended while white workers are descending or rescinding or whatever. So basically they're saying that whites are losing out because of blacks. Now the data doesn't bear that at all, but Harvard University did that as a study. And then there was a big article in the Wall Street Journal somewhere about it. Someone paid for that article. I mean, so if you look at that, I mean, that's why this idea of advocacy, people who understand advocacy know that you have to build out all the messaging around it. So that is a brilliant message to say this time when affirmative action is being taken away in DI, like those women in Georgia who can't even give scholarships to black women, right? I mean, all of this is a concerted effort, but they got Harvard University to basically say white men are losing out to black people. I mean, just wall-faced lie. I mean, you know how hard you have to torture the data to come up with that kind of a solution. So what I'm telling you, that there's so much room out there that anything you say is useful, right? I mean, anything you work on is useful because there's so much to be done.
Yep.
All right. Thanks for adding more work to my already
You
overloaded
called me,
plate.
I was minding my own business. You wanted me on the show.
I called you this time. Usually it's you calling me. So,
That's right.
I'm really thankful and grateful for you taking out time to come on to the show. I think this was a good little warm up for you to get back into the new year and start working next week.
Yep.
So
See you guys.
I
I'll
am.
see you guys at the Minority Policy Summit in February, right? You'll be up here. You'll be in DC.
You haven't sent me a date or an invite,
All
so
right. Well, it's on its way. It's on its way.
Yeah,
okay.
if you're
Well,
still allowed to have it, not sure you're going to be allowed to have it with the Republicans in charge of the Senate, the House, and the White House. And again, there are all kinds of questions about the legitimacy of that election, which we still need. I mean, again, this is where the lack of a consistent questioning comes into
Mhm.
play, because if Democrats had won, the Republicans they'd be filing lawsuits, they'd be writing
Yeah.
op-eds, they'd be doing all kinds of stuff to
Yeah.
raise questions about the legitimacy of the election, which is what they did last cycle.
Before.
This is
That's
what they
that's
did
right.
last time,
Yeah.
January 6th. We haven't done anything. My hope is that we'll see some action here toward the end of January. So.
No, yeah, I don't make any. I don't. There's no promises made. We're planning for one, but who knows what the world will look like to come 6 weeks from now. So,
I'm
but
telling you. So,
thank you guys for having me on, and
okay.
Thaddaus, we're counting on you. We're counting the real estate appraisal world is counting on you to deliver.
I second that. I second that.
well, thanks for you all's vote of confidence. I'll try to do my best not to let you all down, and we're going to keep plugging away. So thank you both for coming on today. Look forward to continuing to work with you all throughout this year, and have a good New Year.
Same to you.
Okay, you do the
Bye,
same.
guys.
Bye bye now.